We don't want to have to dock any bumps from canteen land. Okay, a volunteer for once again, good morning. We certainly do appreciate your taking time out of your very busy schedules to join us today. And yesterday we had a marvelous first day of the OU Spirit program, and we anticipate even better today. And it's very, very appropriate that the topic this morning is Bikur Cholim. Of course, I don't know if you're aware that we are working on a Bikur Cholim community initiative here in Boynton. As the community grows, and we recognize that there is such a need. So this morning, we have Aliza Pilichowski joining us, who I guess is a resident expert in this area. And we're all here for college credit. It's called Bikur Cholim 101. So make sure that you fill out your transfer forms as you leave today. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Aliza Pilichowski.
So it's an honor to be here. This is a gorgeous shul. The OU is an amazing organization. Not only is it because of them that we are able to eat anything in this country, but in addition to that, the programs that we all enjoy in our shuls and in the country and in the world is really amazing, and it's an honor to be associated with the OU. And of course to be here with my somewhat family this summer, so it's always nice to be here. So I am Aliza Pilichowski. I live in Boca. I have 6 children. I passionately love Bikur Cholim. It's something that I've done my entire life. My mother used to take us to the nursing home. She used to do a baby parade when I was a baby, and I followed through my whole life with it. And last year I got the title of chaplain, and I did a chaplain internship at Vinettes Hospice. And this year I am volunteering actively at Bikur Cholim in Boca, where we primarily work at Boca Regional Hospital. And there we work in the Shabbos room and we do the patient visits. So in my years of Bikur Cholim, much of it is really intuition. And looking at the faces in the room and just spending a couple of minutes meeting people, most people in this room have the intuitive part of Bikur Cholim, and you can all do Bikur Cholim naturally. And everyone in this room has done Bikur Cholim. We've been there and done that. What sets chaplaincy and professional Bikur Cholim aside is that you put thought into it. And it's not just something that you're going to do. You're not just going to visit the sick, but you're bringing it to the next level. So I hope that today I'll be able to share with you some tips, some stories, and some things that may be able to help you in your journeys as you start your own Bikur Cholim here in Boynton and in your own lives as you continue. So,
Now it's there.
oh, okay. I'm like, wow, that was fast. As long as it stops by the time that we leave, it's okay. Okay, so the first rule that I always say is when you walk into the room is watch, observe, and listen. So it's not just a matter of listening. It's not just a matter of speaking. It's definitely not your agenda. What you do when you walk into a room is you observe, you listen. It may not ever be any words. You may walk into a patient's room and get nothing from them verbally, but you can see if the patient is in pain. You can look at the things that are in the room. Are there balloons for a birthday? Are there pictures of the grandchildren? All of those are going to be your clues into how you're going to guide the visit. You are coming into somebody else's space. When you walk into somebody's home and you're doing a home visit, when you walk into their home in the hospital, you're entering their space. And it's important to recognize that as you do that. You know, the words that we always use are, we're going to meet the patients where they are. And in order to do that, you have to understand who they are to meet them where they are. And that's going to be picking up those tools. So you're going to react to what they give you. One of my favorite visits of all time was when I was in hospice. I had a patient, I'm sorry, can you hear me?
A little louder.
Okay. I had a patient named Nancy, and she was dying of advanced stage liver disease. She had toxins already in her entire body, and she was having hallucinations from those toxins. And I walked into the room, and she's petrified, and she is crying to her sister and saying to her, "The elephants are coming." And she was very scared that the elephants were coming. And clearly, in the hospital, in this inpatient unit of Vitas, there were no elephants coming. But her sister understood what she was saying. She was saying, "I'm scared." It doesn't matter what words are coming out of her mouth. What she was saying was, "I am scared." And that's how she responded to her. And she said the most brilliant words. She said, "Nancy, don't worry. I'm here, and I'm going to take care of you." And that's what her sister needed to hear. And she calmed down, her whole body calmed down, and she didn't dismiss what she said as, "There are no elephants." Obviously, there are no elephants. That's not what she was saying. She was saying, "I'm scared." And that's why when you're listening, it's not just the words that they're saying, it's what is going on. So even though Nancy said very clearly, "I'm scared of the elephants," that's not what she was scared of. And her sister was able to respond in kind by saying, "Don't worry, I'm here for you." So that's the first thing, and it's very important to do. And then the next part of the listening is to listen. To not be there for your story. You're there for the patient. So when the patient starts telling you a great story about themselves, that's not the time to say, "Oh, that reminds me of when I also did that." You see this very often, you know, and you almost laugh when you hear somebody else do this. But you'll see somebody will say, I have this disease. And somebody will say, "Oh, I know someone that has the same thing as you." You don't know what that person has. So if that person says that they have stomach cancer, and you know somebody else that has stomach cancer, it's two completely different cases. It is not the same thing. And you are not there to tell your story about your friend that had stomach cancer. You are there for that patient. And that's a very important part of the listening process. The next part of the listening process that I find critical is really painting a picture. That when you walk in, you're going to get a story from the person. So when you walk into a room and you see the person, you walk in and you say, "Hi," you obviously introduce yourself, and you recognize that you're walking into their space, and then you start to paint a picture. So you start learning about them. Who are they? What did they do? Do they have children? What are their passions in life? What do they do when they're not here in the hospital? Because it's very easy to get caught up in their situation right now. This is the most important thing that's going on in their life right now, probably, but there's a lot more to the person than their illness. And that's important to remember, that when you're talking to somebody, you're not talking to an illness, but you need to talk to a person, to a story, to who they are. And that's where the listening component really comes in. And you want to paint that picture. The second thing, which is really the first thing, but you can't do it without listening and observing, is caring for physical needs. When you walk into a patient's room, in any hospital, in any caregiving setting, they are never going to have enough care. And for anybody that has ever been sick or has ever been in a hospital, we know that you're never going to have enough care. So when somebody walks into the room, you need to make sure that their physical needs are being met to whatever degree that you can. So if you see that somebody's in pain, that's bad. And then you can do something about it. You can get a nurse. If they're just uncomfortable, you can shift a pillow. You see the oxygen is out of their nose, you can fix that. You know, these little things make all the difference. When I started in hospice, I have a mentor who is, she's my Rebbe and my everything in patient care. And her name is Sarah Roby. And she is a Zen Buddhist priest. And she walks into a room, and the first thing that she does before anything, and she specializes in hospice, the first thing that she does is she assesses the room. She turns off the lights, she dims them so that you know, if the patient is in a much more advanced stage, they're able to be comfortable. They don't have any bright lights on them. If there's a TV on, very often people will just have TVs on. She goes ahead, she turns it off. She fixes the pillows so that the person is comfortable, and then she begins her visit, and she begins her assessment, and she begins that interaction, and she begins the prayers and everything that she's going to do in that visit. But before you can have a conversation with somebody, before you can tend to any spiritual needs, before you can tend to any emotional needs, the first thing that has to happen is to make sure that the physical pain is taken care of. And once that physical pain is taken care of, then you're able to help somebody emotionally and spiritually. If anybody has any questions or comments, please feel free to just raise your hand and speak along with us. Yeah?
My first question is the hospice different than a regular hospital? I mean, the things that you said to do, I've done Bikur Cholim, and I was really afraid to touch a pillow.
Stand up because we can't hear it.
I'll repeat it. So, is that the question?
I was just uncomfortable to touch in the hospital. I've never been in a hospice situation.
Yeah.
Is that different?
So yes, it is, and especially, you know, when I was doing my internship, I was a part of the team. I was a part of the medical team, so I did have those rights. That being said, what you can be is an advocate. So you can walk over to any nurse in any hospital and say, the patient in room 211 seems to be uncomfortable, or told me that they need more pain medication. And the nurse can assess that. Now, you definitely do not want to be giving any food or anything, any type of intervention like that, without permission from the medical staff. But you can work with the medical staff, and you can walk over to any one of the nurses and say, would it be okay if I gave this person something to drink because they're thirsty? Would it be okay if I fix the oxygen? Would it be okay if I help them readjust in the bed? And sometimes the answer is no. But you can work with that as well. But as long as you can be an advocate for the patient, and as we all know, every patient in a hospital needs their own personal advocate. So, you know, we all have accompanied our relatives or ourselves when we're in the hospital, and we need somebody to be there as an advocate. Do you have a follow-up?
I have two more questions.
Yes.
One is, if there's a closed door or a closed curtain around the bed, should one actually, I mean, that's their space. What should you do? So
there are different reasons that a door can be closed, and that's something that you need to figure out. So if you do see a curtain closed or a door closed, that's when you do knock, or you say, would it be okay if I come in? Or you ask the nurse and you become a part of the team. So you can ask them, would it be okay if I walked in? Because very often, there are some patients where you'll walk in and the patient will be sleeping, and you're like, I'm not going to bother them. But when you go to the nurse and you ask, they'll be like, no, definitely wake them up. They need to be more, they need to interact. And they may want to, but because they're bored, they fall asleep. And if you know that information, then you can approach. So you always want to recognize the fact that you're entering into somebody else's space. The same way that if you went to somebody's home, you wouldn't just walk into their front door. You'd knock. You'd knock and then you'd walk in, or you'd ask a family member if it would be okay if you went. And you have one more question.
The last question is, if someone is in chemo or anything with cancer, where you know that the person probably will never be completely well, but will have a remission, what do you say to them? How do you end the visit?
Okay, so I'm going to get to that. Not yet, but I will address that. Go ahead.
Yeah, speak up.
She was concerned that, in our day and age, in terms of lawsuits, of doing anything with the patients, and that nurses may feel like the visitor is stepping on their turf.
Yes, that's right.
So we have to recognize that although those things are true, our main concern is the patient care. So we are there for the patient. If that patient is in pain, you do have to use your chachma and your wisdom to how to approach the staff sensitively, but you must approach the staff. And there are times where you will offend the staff because it will happen. But your main goal is to make sure that that patient their needs, his or her needs, are being cared for. Yeah.
I did Bikur Cholim in hospitals when I lived in New Jersey, and for the most part, when I walked into the room with the patients, I would ask them, is there anything I can do?
Mm-hmm.
And they would let me know. I never turned off TVs because they may have wanted it on. But there were situations, I never really knew how to address it, that I would visit the Jewish patients, and now and then there would be one who didn't want, any visitors, was upset, that I was visiting him because he was a Jewish patient and didn't want to have anything to do with the Bikur Cholim, the place
Yeah.
where I live.
And that's a part of meeting the patients where they are. When Sarah would turn the TVs off, they very often, the staff in our hospice would come in and they would turn the TV on, and the patients would be actively dying. They were not watching any TV, and it was not anything for the patient. It just happened to be on. So when she would turn it off, it wasn't something that the patient wanted on. and she was, obviously coming into doing it. And yes, it's a matter of listening to the patient and meeting them where they are. Many times you'll walk in and the patient will say, I don't want visitors now. And that's okay. And that's okay. That's a part of, anybody that's done any sales or any work, you're going to get no's. And that's okay. We need to make sure that we're there offering and people don't have to accept. I take my daughters to the nursing home. There's a rehab center right by our house. And we go every Shabbos. And I think part of the learning experience for them is when they knock on somebody's door and they say, is it okay if we come in? And the patient says, no. And, and it's hard for them at the beginning. It's hard for me when somebody says no. But that's the greatest lesson, is that's what your job is right now, is to give them the space and to say, that's okay. Because meeting somebody where they are is giving them what they need, not what you want. Yeah, you know what? I'd love to have a great experience by walking into the room and making them feel great and having a great emotional, spiritual experience together, and we'll dive in together, and that would be a great experience. But that's not what the patient wants. That's not what I'm going to be giving them, because it's not about me. It's about the patient. Yeah.
Sometimes the patient has visitors.
Hired caregiver. Sometimes that's going to be, someone who's, a staff member in a hospital, or,
Family.
or very often it's going to be family or friends. So the first thing that you want to do when you come in is, obviously, you want to introduce yourself and remember that your focus is on the patient. So introduce yourself to the patient and then ask the patient, if they can, say, who are the people that are in the room? Because sometimes you'll see someone who is a clearly hired caregiver, but they're not just a hired caregiver who they just called today, they're a part of the family. And you're going to want to include them in everything that you're doing. When you're talking to people, you want to get a full sense of what's going on, and that you're only going to be able to do with including everybody that's in the room. So it's a very important piece, is to include everybody. And you also need their respect of the people that are in the room, because they are the caregivers in many situations, and they need to be able to trust you as you walk into the room. Not only that, what I like to do is, and I'm going to talk about prayer soon, but when I dive in with the person, with the patient, I think it's very important to include the people that are in the room in the prayer. So, if I meet a David in the hospital, I'll say, we want David to have a complete and speedy recovery, so that he can go back to his life with his lovely wife, Sarah, and may he be able to enjoy many years of nachas with his children, Joe and Shira, who are sitting here in the room. So with all of that, you can weave it together, and then they become a part of everything. And they're also gaining the hope and the excitement of having the person back to their life. Yeah.
Following up on what you said, how do you handle the room where there's a Jewish patient and then a non-Jewish patient next door in the same room, and you're handling prayer and other things? How do you differentiate, or how do you include the other person?
Okay, so I wouldn't say include them in that prayer, because each patient is unique, and you're not there for both patients at the same time. So when you came in to see David Schwartz, you're there for David Schwartz, and it's only about David Schwartz. And then afterwards, when you want to go to Chris Christensen, you should, because he's sitting right there, and you should go over to him and say, how are you feeling? And I wanted to wish you a complete and speedy recovery. You're not going to be investing the same amount of time, because we do have limited resources. I'm sure here in Boynton, you're not going to have limited resources. I can see that all of you are very young, energetic, and full of life, and you're going to have to be turning volunteers away. But at the organizations that I've worked in, we've had limited resources. So I can't do an hour visit with Chris Christensen. But for sure, you walk over to Chris and you ask him how he's doing, and you wish him a complete and speedy recovery. But your main focus is really going to be on David Schwartz. And I wouldn't include Chris in the prayers unless David would tell me that Chris is a part of his experience, which he may be. You know, that can happen, but generally I don't see it.
When I worked with people, I find that very interesting when two patients are in the room. And of course, we want people Jewish people who don't even all care. And we go over and say, how are you? To the other patient. But they feel it, they understand.
Yes.
Gee, you spend a lot of time.
Yes.
My friends here. How about me?
Yes. So it's all, another part of the sensitivity of meeting people where they are is really not spending time with non-Jewish patients. Because when people come into a hospital, and the way that it works at Boca Regional is they write down their religion. So when the imam and the priest and whoever comes in to do the visitations, they get a list of that religion. And if somebody isn't written down as a religion, it means they're really not interested in what you're offering. So we don't want to start going into people that haven't written down that they're Jewish. And the same way that we wouldn't want, other religions proselytizing to our Jewish patients. So there's a balance that we have to really respect in a hospital of really not, pushing ourselves on anybody that hasn't requested. And by writing down that you're Jewish, that in a way is a request. Yes.
And with Dr. Allen's question, if there are family members in the room, and would you suggest that maybe if the volunteers, when they're family members, to maybe come back another time, would you see it as an inpatient advice?
No, not at all. I think going into a family is very beneficial because it's very, very difficult for the family members as well. They're going through a very difficult time very often.
May I ask my question first?
Yeah.
Unless the family member, if you give consent, the family patient, and this is one family patient, unless they ask you to be there. Because sometimes you tend to see triangle, where then they would, the volunteer or the other person come in, and there's the family member, there's a little bit of a stuff that's going on there. So, I guess it was being treated on an individual basis.
Absolutely. You are walking into somebody else's space, and that's what you always have to be sensitive about. I do think I have found that there are definitely families that do not want it. We're here, we don't need you, type of attitude, and that's fine. But very often, they themselves need the visit. They need the support. It's a very difficult situation when you're sitting in a hospital for days and you don't know what's going on with your loved one. And you're just sitting there and when you walk in as the visitor, you're able to care for the families and for the caregivers as well. And that's an important part that you do have, and that you do have the opportunity to give. And of course, I'm sorry, what's your name? Yael. As Yael said, that's an extremely important part that we always have to be aware of is the sensitivity. When you walk into a room, you are walking into somebody else's space. So you have to make sure that you are wanted in that space before you enter that space. So the next thing that I have here is creating connection and a safe space. You want to make sure that the patient and the family feels comfortable talking to you. How do you achieve that? By really being genuinely interested in them. I want to hear about you. How are you doing today? You want to make sure that when they say, I feel awful, that you're able to say, that was difficult. You're okay with it. They can say that they feel awful, and you're okay with it. That is going to happen. You very often in hospitals, and very often with people that are sick, they feel awful. They are in pain, and that's okay. And what you want to do when they say that is listen, not say, I understand how you feel. Because again, you have no idea how they feel. So you don't know how they feel, but you can hear what they're saying. And they'll say, I'm in pain, and you can say, I hear that you're in pain. You know, and have you been in pain for a long time? And you can follow up with questions, not ever assuming that you know anything about the pain that they are going through. But you're allowing them that space to talk. And you're allowing them the affirmation of, I am listening to you. And that very often is what people need. And not only a sick person, but when you talk to anybody in life, when you ask somebody how they're doing, how many times a day do you walk up to anybody and say, how you doing? And they say, great. That's not an answer. Most of the people that you're there are saying great. Who knows how they're doing? And you don't really care how they're doing. But when you ask somebody, how are you doing? And especially as a Bikur Cholim volunteer, you're walking in, you want to know how they're doing. And I'm okay, and I'm comfortable with the fact that you feel like garbage. That's okay. And I want to hear it. And I want to be there with you in that pain. So it's creating that safe space. The next thing is when you're listening to the stories is judgment. Judgment is not for us. Judgment is for our God. That's for God. God can judge. One of my first patients was a lady named Lakeisha, and she had AIDS, and she was telling me her story. And I'm sitting there doing an assessment on her, and I'm like, I can't believe her life. You know, once she was diagnosed, she had more children. I'm like, how could she do that? And I couldn't fathom the whole lifestyle. I went through the visit, it was fine. And when I reviewed it with my mentor later, she said, Aliza, that's not your problem. You are there for Lakeisha. If that's her lifestyle, that's fine. You're there for her. And that's very important. When you walk in with somebody who's dying of lung cancer because they were smoking for 50 years, you don't need to say to them, you know, obviously you have lung cancer. That's what happens when you smoke for 50 years. They don't care, or they don't know, or they know, and that's what their life circumstances brought upon them. But it doesn't really matter. That's not your problem. You are there for the patient. So again, you want to listen, you want to be there, you want to meet them where they are. So yes, I did not make the same life decisions as Lakeisha did. I didn't make the same decisions as many of my patients who have lung disease and all kinds of different liver disease from different choices that they've made in their lives. But I can be there where they are. I've made mistakes in my life. I've done things, and I can be there for them where they are. And that's what we have to remember. So when somebody talks, whatever they're saying, we want to affirm what they're saying. You don't have to say, I understand what you're going through, because you don't. But you can say, I hear what you're saying. You can repeat what they say, and it makes somebody feel heard. And that very often is what people need. With a Jewish visitation, what sets, pastoral care apart from a Jewish visit, Jewish Bikur Cholim halachic visit, is that we are going to daven with or for our patients. So when I walk into a patient's room and we have a great visit and I say, would you like for me to say a prayer for you? I always say, would you like to, can we say a prayer together? Even at that point, if they say no, I can still daven for them. And that's where the visit comes to a halachic visit. When we pray for somebody, that becomes a Jewish Bikur Cholim halachic visit. So what I do is I take everything from our conversation that we've had in the 10, 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, 2 hours that I've sat with the patient, and I weave that into what I am going to pray with them. So yesterday I was in a patient's room, and oh no, you know what? I'll tell you quickly, and then I'll go into the other one. I was in a patient's room, and he starts telling me, you know, I was training a volunteer. The volunteer wasn't able to connect to the patient, so she like turned to me, and I took it, and I said to him, you know, she wanted to go straight to the prayer, so she said, "What's your name?" And he couldn't give her his name, so I said, "Was ist dein Name?" So I said in Yiddish, "What's your name?" And all of a sudden, you could see the man completely transform. He was brought to a completely different place. The man clearly had not been involved in Yiddish in many, many years, but he was able to immediately answer that his name was David. And I understood right then that this David was not going to need, not only not need, but the appropriate prayer for him was not going to be just an English psalm that I was going to sing. He needed to connect back to wherever that Yiddish was coming from. So his tefillah was going to be different than somebody else's. So that's where I'm going to start with him. And so I said Shema with him, because that was what I felt would be best with him. We said Shema, and when I started to say Shema, you could see him starting to mouth the words, and as we continued, he was able to say every word loud and clear and audible, which was something that he wasn't able to do in the rest of the visit. And then what I said was everything that I learned about him from the rest of the visit. I had learned what he did, what he had done his whole life, and where he was from, and that he has children. And I wove that into a prayer, and I said it in English. I want David to be able to call out to God from within. There's a certain prayer that's completely different than a regular Shemona Esrei that you can do when you're in a difficult time. When we see Mordechai in Megillas Esther, we see Mordechai goes out into the street, and what does he do? He screams. That's it. That's it. He wasn't saying, Rifa'enu Hashem. He wasn't saying that. He wasn't saying, Hatzilenu. He screamed. And that's what I want to empower my patients and families with. I want you to understand that you too can call out. So as I say this prayer, I say, and then at the end of the prayer, I want David to be able to add if he wants to add, and I want him to give him the tools that even though he hasn't been involved in any type of tefillah for 80 years since he's been in Cheder, I want him to be able to call out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to be able to call out to God and say, help, help. And it doesn't have to be fancy words from the sitter that he doesn't have and that he doesn't remember, but it can be from whatever is within. So the story that I wanted to tell you, there are two stories in this. The first one is what I learned from a Baptist family. And this was one of the coolest visits that I had had. And I walked in, and clearly that was not my upbringing. I've never been in a Baptist surrounding before, but I'm going to meet the patients where they are. So I meet with the daughter Nellie, and she tells me about her mom, who was dying. And Nellie told me that she and her mom used to sing in the church together. So we had a long talk, and it was a beautiful talk. We spoke a lot, and I learned a lot about her mom and her and their relationship. It was really beautiful. And then we walked back into the room, and the brothers and sisters from the church were there. So when I introduced myself, I said, and how are you related to the patients? And they said, we're her brothers and sisters. So I'm like, oh, that is so nice that you're all so close. And they're like, no, from the church. And I'm like, oh, of course. But of course, I'm meeting them where they are, and then I finally understood what they meant by that. And so I said, so I put together, I chose a psalm that I felt was appropriate for them. I read the psalm in English. And then I said, Nellie, I want you to lead us in song. And a song that you sing with your mom in church. And she did. And she sang a beautiful song. And what everyone in the room, all the brothers and sisters did in that room, was every time they would come to the end of a stanza, they would call out to God. And they would say, thank you, and save her, and heal her, and whatever they were feeling, they would put in. And when they were dancing as they were singing, and I looked at them in amazement, and every time that I think of that family, I think that's what we need to do with our own tequilas. That's how we need to act when we die. We're not going to be able to sing and dance, because for me, that's not my nature. I'm not going to, while I'm davening and while I'm connecting with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm not going to be clapping and screaming. But what I can do is really put all of myself into it. When I want to daven, I want to say, Kol atzmotai tomarna. All of my bones are going to call out to God. That's how I want to call out to God, and that's what I learned from that family. Each prayer is going to be different, and each prayer should be unique for that family, where they can have that spiritual experience that it is for them. For that Baptist family, it was through song, it was through dance, it was through calling out. For David, it was about listening to the Yiddish that he grew up with in Cheder. Just hearing the Yiddish was enough of a connection for him. But when it comes to Henry, this was one of the coolest hours. I walked into the room, his eyes were closed, and I saw his hired caregiver there. And I walked over to her and I said, in a whisper, I said, how are you doing today? And she started crying immediately, and she said, I'm fine. She said, it's hard. And of course, when she said, I'm fine, she's crying. She's not fine. She said, I'm fine, and she said, it's hard. And I said, I nodded and listened. And she says to me, Henry's eyes are closed, but his eyesight is failing him, and he can hear everything that's going on, and he's fully awake. So I said, great. So I walked over to Henry, and I introduced myself, and I started talking to him. I started asking him questions, and everything that I asked him, he would fall asleep in the middle and start, eating his words. I wasn't able to understand anything that he said. So I said to Mary, I said, was Henry affiliated at all with Judaism? And so she said, not so much. His sons did have bar mitzvahs. Okay, but that was 70 years ago that his sons had bar mitzvahs. So I said, okay, I'm in the room. I'm going to try to switch directions. So I say, "Vos is da nomen?" And he opens his eyes, bright and fully open. He is totally there. He looks me straight in the eyes, and he says, "My nomen is," and he closes his eyes. He couldn't say it. And he tries again, and he says, and he screams on top of his lungs, and he says, "My nomen is," and he couldn't say it. And the nurse, the hired caregiver, looks at me in shock. She had never seen him come alive with such strength in years. This is the same caregiver that had cared for this man's wife 5 years earlier. So she's been with the family for a long time. She has never seen him like this. So I said to her, I said it would be okay if I touched Henry's hand. Henry's hand, his skin was already thinning, and I didn't want to touch it obviously without permission, but also because I wasn't sure how sturdy his skin was. So she said yes, you can. And this is obviously something that I've discussed with the Rav. It's something that you can all make your own decisions and speak with your own Rabbanim about. And I took his hand and I covered his eyes, and I started to say Shema with him. And again, he opens his eyes as wide as can be, and he screams the words of Shema. The hired caregiver is crying. Tears are streaming down her cheeks. And she says, "What are you saying?" And I said, "These words that I just said are the words that a Jew says in our prayers. We say it in the morning, we say it in the evening, and we say it before we go to sleep." And then I said, "These are the words that Henry's mother said when he was a baby before he went to sleep every night." For many people, these words bring back memories from the Holocaust, from our education, and from every part of our being. And she was completely floored by the whole experience. She asked me that I would transliterate it for her, and I did. And she continued to say the Shema prayer with him throughout his stay in the inpatient unit until he did finally expire. And what I learned from this experience, and really from every patient experience, is really knowing who that patient is, that you can elevate that into a prayer, that you can elevate that into a connection, that you can elevate that into your own experience in that room. Henry was an amazing experience, but that's an experience that you can achieve with every visit. The last thing in prayer that's very, very important, and this is what you had asked about before, is to never give unrealistic hope. When somebody is in hospice, most likely they are going to die. In my year during that internship, there was one person who was taken off hospice. He did end up dying, but there was a little bit of hope for him. But if they're in hospice, they're going to die. If somebody has cancer that's not being treated, they are going to die. So we're not going to say to the family, "Don't worry, everything's going to be okay, and David's going to be going home soon." He's not. He's not. And what we're going to pray for with the family is we're going to say, "May David know no pain. May he not suffer. And may all of you have the strength to go through this process with him." And whatever it is, and especially the way that, when we volunteer at Bikur Cholim in Boca, I don't get to see the file. I don't know what the future is going to be with that patient. So yesterday I met a family in the lobby, and I was with this volunteer, and she's looking at me very strangely as I say to the family, after them telling me that their father, they just don't know what's going to be with their father, and I said to the family, I said, he should be comfortable, and that we should make sure that he's not in any pain. And she asked me afterwards why I didn't say he should have a complete refuah shalema. Because we don't know. I don't know where that man is. I don't know if they're going to be doing an open heart surgery and there is hope for him, or there may not be. And we cannot be giving false hope. And again, that's of course meeting somebody where they are. We're not going to be imposing anything of ours on anybody else, but certainly when it comes to tefillah, we're not going to be imposing that on anybody else and giving somebody that falsehood. And the last thing is to really have a Rebbe Chaver. What's a Rebbe Chaver? Somebody that you have that's not only your friend, but is also your teacher and your mentor. That when you go and you do a patient visit, that you can call them and say, I met with this patient today and it was very upsetting to me. And then your Rebbe Chaver can say to you, why was it difficult for you? What did that stir up inside of you? Why were you not able to connect with that patient? How are you feeling now? Are you going to be able to go back? How are you going to follow up with that patient? You need your Rebbe Chaver to check in with you to make sure that you are okay, that you are effectively doing your job as a visitor. In order to improve in life, you need to be critiqued. You need to have that positive encouragement. You need to have that mentor-friend relationship. One of my favorite visits was with one of my Rebbe Chavers, and I was taking somebody around who had done Bikur Cholim for many years, but had never done it in Boca. So I was training this person, and he had the charisma and he had everything to it. He had never prayed with patients before, so that was going to be something different. So we meet this lady, and we don't see their file. So I don't know what her medical diagnosis was. It appeared to us that she had some type of stroke. She was only speaking from one side of her mouth, and you could, that's what it looked like, and it was difficult to understand her. So she says to me, I want to go home. So she had a hired caregiver who did not seem to be very interested in everything that was going on in the room, and I said, is she going to be going home soon? So she said, no, we don't know what's going to be. So I said, I said, we don't know, and hopefully we'll be able to go home soon, but we don't know yet. And then I asked her a question, and she answers me with, I want to go home. And so I said, it's Thursday, it's going to be Shabbos tomorrow. Do you celebrate Shabbos? And she just gets quiet, and she didn't answer me at all, which I understood to be a yes, in the way that her body language was before that. So I turned to my Rebbe Chaver, and I said to the patient, I said, Marcia, my friend is going to sing Shalom Aleichem with you. And she doesn't say anything, and he starts singing Shalom Aleichem. And he's a little uncomfortable, because here we are in this hospital room with a hired caregiver she was studying her biology for a test the next day, and the patient, who we don't even know that she's going to connect to this song. So he starts singing a little uncomfortably, and he sings the first stanza, and you can see her whole body relaxing. She was so tense before that she just wanted to go home, and she starts to relax. And so he looks at me, and I said, go on. So he goes on, and he starts with Boachem L'Shalom, and you can see her completely being brought to a completely different place. And she's somewhere, I don't know where she is, I don't know what Shabbos table she's at, I don't know what that looks like, I don't know when that happened in her life, but she is in a different place right now. He goes on with Barchuni, and you can see her breathing is calming down. And as he concludes with Barchuni and Seichem, she starts crying. She wasn't upset, but there were tears coming down her cheeks. And we walk out of the room, leaving our patient, who is completely calm and completely comfortable where she is. And he looks at me and he says, I can't believe what just happened. He was able to take this patient and remove this emotional pain that she had and allow her to have a spiritual experience in that room. And those stories are all amazing, and they're all very tangible stories. But every single encounter that you have with a patient, even when the patient says, I don't want any visitors, is this same experience. You're meeting the patient where they are, and you're tending to their needs for who they are. So when you walk out of that room, that is an extremely powerful experience that you just had. You met that patient where they are. So I wish you all much hatzlacha and success in your endeavor in this new Bikur Cholim, and I will answer some questions. Go ahead.
We spoke about this, I walked out for a second, confidentiality.
So confidentiality. So it's different in each hospital. Obviously confidentiality. We're as a volunteer, we should never share any information with other people. So when you're going to be meeting with a patient, you should never walk up to somebody else and say, oh, by the way, I was in the hospital and I saw Nancy Summer, she just broke her foot. That's completely inappropriate. That's her. In terms of legally, that each hospital has its own rules, each setting has its own rules, but certainly in terms of a professional volunteer, you would never share any of that information with
Without your
others.
family.
With your family?
At home, your wife,
No. You can share experiences, but you would never say, I saw this patient who has, liver disease. That's between the patient and you, and that's a very sacred space. Yeah.
That's one of the things we responding right now for the hospital. Because how do you actually reveal a patient's religion? So basically, what we are working on at hospital is you got to get the patient's consent at the time of admission, be the patient or a patient's significant other or who's legally responsible to actually release that person's religion. Because you cannot, it's against him, but also leave it out. You can't do that. So that's one of the things that needs to be worked out and see who's on board, and who's not, because figure out who's released that. And I was talking to a case by case.
Right, that's up to the hospital. Any names that you get in the hospital, that person has written, when they register, they write down Jewish, and then affiliation, it's local regional, they write down affiliation of, it says church, but it means synagogue. But that's up to each individual to write what they want to share. Yeah.
Visions.
Very common stories about people who are, let's say, in hospice, or very, very sick. And many times we think we're doing a visit to the ill, and we go into a situation where patients are not that sick.
Right? You can walk into a room where somebody just had some plastic surgery done, and they're not sick. They didn't go in sick.
Yeah, so I was listening very carefully and attention to something about, you're doing it because you want to do the visit. So if I understand correctly, maybe you said this too, you're sort of obligated to say something. You can't just say, you can't just be tangential all the time and, see you or whatever. You have to express some sort of a prayer for them.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, if you do that, and then you get into the gradations, you said, you don't want to say something like, I hope you get well, whatever.
So when somebody, so a couple, there were a lot of things that you spoke about. I'm going to try to answer that. So very often you'll go, when you're in a hospital, you'll go and somebody just gave birth. That's a very joyous occasion. It's not, but if somebody's in a hospital, most of the time, they probably are in some type of pain. And even if they have given birth, and it is appropriate to say mazel tov, at the same time, the women in this room can all attest to they are probably in pain. And so too with the plastic surgery, where it's not that they're in grave danger of being, of a heart, they didn't have a heart transplant, but they too are in pain. But again, it all comes back to the yesod, to the foundation of meeting the patient where they are. We're not going to assume anything. When I walk into that patient's room, they may be fine. The person could have had a dislocated, bone, arm, some bones that were dislocated. They popped it right in. The patient's fine. Well, I'm not going to assume anything. I'm going to talk to them and try to find out what's going on. But chances are, it is going to be pain. If they're, either some kind of illness or pain when they're in the hospital. With giving false hope, it's, what do you say? It's hard. It's very hard. But you want to leave where they are. There are many people that last second, the way that they deal with somebody who is dying, they want to always say, we're davening for refuah shalema. And if that's where they are, you're going to say it, you're going to hold their hands as they say it. And you're going to allow them to do that. My aunt who had cancer, that's the way that she dealt with it. She died from cancer, and that's the way that she dealt with it. And everyone around her thought that there was hope because that's how she wanted to deal with it. And that's okay. That's how she wanted to live that part of her life. And that's okay. But we are not going to give that person false hope. We're not going to say to somebody that is actively dying, we're not going to say to their family, don't worry, they're going to be fine. We're not going to impose that on anybody else because they're not going to be fine. They are going to die. And that's okay. Sometimes it is appropriate at the right time. If there is anything that we can do, please be in touch with us. Because very often, when people say no, they're nervous about a couple of things. Number one, that you're proselytizing, meaning even Jews to Jews. You have an agenda of pushing your frumkeit onto them. And the second thing that they're nervous about is that you're coming around trying to collect money for your organization. We're Jewish. So you want to make it clear that you have none of that on your agenda. Your agenda is to be there for the patient and their family, period. Here is my card, here is my information, and if there's anything that I can do, please be in touch. And very often that will allow them the space to say, you know what, if you want to come in and say a prayer, that would be okay. And then you can say, yeah, you know what, I'll come in and say a prayer. And that sometimes does relieve it a little bit, but you will get no's. But that is a success when you're able to say, it's okay. They don't want a visitor now, and to be able to walk away. We never, ever want to be that person where a patient is trying to sleep, does not want visitors, does not want you in their room, and say, no, I know what's best. I'm going to come in and I'm going to say my prayer and I'm going to make everything better. You're not. You're not making it better if they don't want you there.
Sometimes it's the son or the daughter that kind of makes that decision without the patients being even aware of it.
Yeah, that can happen also, but that is the reality.